A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again. So, here we go. Jurassic Park 3, the third installment in Jurassic Park, and overall, I will say that out of all the ones in the trilogy, this one probably is not exactly as good as with the other three. I still have a lot of enjoyability out of this one, and a lot of great memories. And believe it or not, this was actually one of the very first things that I ever did when it came to social media. But to talk about it now would probably be like talking about my worst nightmares. A thing that I never want to remember ever again. In any case though, there's definitely a lot of statistic things that I've done with my life when it came to Jurassic Park 3 as a whole. For a film from 2001, I sure was able to get a lot of enjoyment out of this, especially within the first few years of my life. And being that it, at the time, was kind of recent, it was never at all that big of a bad thing in life. Some people might not like it just because of the fact that there were a couple of things that this movie did that were very different, in spite of returning to its old roots that the first film gave us, and despite having some familiar cast members that the first film was famous for. I mean, unlike The Lost World Jurassic Park, which was certainly a different direction that went around with the series, Jurassic Park 3 was able to return to some old roots, while trying to create new ones at the same time to allow for a potential growth factor. In any case, the plotline is what's important here, along with other factors. Obviously, Steven Spielberg was working on this, and obviously, we have a new contender here. Unlike the first two films, which had a T-Rex centering on even the poster art, the third one, of course, had a new ferocious theropod. One that has been hailed in a lot of different things. Some controversy, some changes going on in its evolution, especially since it was first discovered in the year 1912 by Ernest Stromer in Germany. But after going through tons of changes, from being destroyed in World War II to being revisited in the 1990s to having multiple changes go on and multiple discoveries made, even at the turn of this new decade, there's still a lot going on about Spinosaurus that we really don't know about. It's definitely the whole beginning of a whole new clade of dinosaurs with lots of continuing changes. Anyways though, we're set off with the first scene of the film. Once again, it's something that doesn't necessarily pertain much to any continuity. However, unlike what the second film gave us, the third film has two characters in particular known by the name of Billy and Eric. Eric is whom we later discover to be the son of a certain couple known as the Kirbys. And we don't get to know them until some time passes. Until then though, they're out on a little boating trip in which that they go parasailing. However, some things take place. As they enter a large blanket of fog, the boat comes out with some damage and the crew is missing. They have no idea what's going on, but Eric and Billy eventually cut away from the boat just before it crashes onto some nearby rocks. They basically glide their way over to the nearby island and eventually make their landing. It cuts away from that point though, because after the title card commences, we're eventually scrolled through the opening credits, and once again, we get to see the likes of Dr. Alan Grant, once again played by Sam Neill, and Laura Dern, whom still plays Dr. Ellie Sattler, as well as a child named Charlie. Charlie is, of course, Ellie's son. And of course, with the likes of Sattler and Grant still going on, Grant is more of an inspiration to Charlie. One whom is more than destined to become a part of paleontology, as Charlie does become fascinated with dinosaurs, much like what his mother and Grant have gone through. Of course, there is a little lesson that Grant decides to imply to Charlie, being that herbivores don't really fight as much, using some plastic toys as a demonstration. However, he does go into detail that carnivores are known for fighting each other, but Ellie does insist that they keep that talk for a few years later. Charlie is only 3, he doesn't quite understand that well. In any case though, They do go into some discussions before we're eventually relayed over to another scene where we do in fact get to meet, believe it or not, the Kirbys. Paul Kirby, played by William H. Macy, as well as his wife Amanda, whom is played by Téa Leoni. So when you think about it, we're not only introduced to a new segment of the cast, but to still have some old cast members around for a third film in the franchise. That's something that not many people expected to see. But to at least have some remnants of the first Jurassic Park film that we recognize so well was certainly a welcome addition. With the third film in the series, why they couldn't really attend much in the second film is beyond us. I could never understand why. Some might think it has something to do with the faults that were at hand. Some might think that it has to be because of the careers that skyrocketed and they were a little too busy. Or maybe it's because Steven Spielberg did some planning for the second film. Theories aside though, we're eventually let off on a new adventure. However, in this instance, it's more about the recovery of Eric and Billy. Because after all, that little parasailing trip did turn into an unexpected act of darkness. They had to cut away from that boat, sail off to the island, and contact was presumably lost. Supposedly, they had no cellular contact of any sort. They couldn't get a hold of Eric or Billy. So they basically launch a flight over there with pilots Udetsky and Nash. These pilots, of course, were played by the one and only Michael Jeter, as well as Bruce A. Young. And they do, in fact, mount a small passenger plane to not only take the likes of the Kirbys and Grant, but also have a few others along the way. These people are, in fact, going to allow for the group to scout the area to make sure no predators are around, and also to make sure that the group is safe from any harm. However, when they do land down on the runway that once was a part of the construction of Isla Nublar, and the somewhat civilizational tactic that was quickly botched because of the breakouts in Jurassic Park 1, thanks to Nedria again. What eventually goes down is that Cooper, one of the members of the team, turns up injured, and, well, some roars in the distance prompt the rest to get back on the plane and eventually try to take off away from the island. However, Cooper does in fact get out of the jungle, runs out onto the runway, and ends up in the way of the plane. Obviously, Nash is not content with Cooper being in the way, and even more so, is not willing to pick him up, knowing that he might risk the passengers and the crew involved in the plane itself. Who knows what could be going on in the jungle? Little did they know, though, there was something following Cooper the whole time. And here's the thing, though. This is actually what I was talking about earlier. Remember when I said that social media, this was one of the very first things that I did when it came to that? There actually was a theory that I put together that the reason why Cooper ran out of the runway begging the plane to stop was because it was discussed earlier and even shown that Cooper apparently had punched Grant. Yeah, he punched Grant. Now he's begging the plane to stop, expecting them to pick him up after running out of the jungle and such, like, haha. The theory basically came around to be that maybe Cooper was demanding the plane come over and pick him up because he wanted to apologize to Grant after getting lost in that jungle there and getting mauled by something big. Obviously, he was going to have to go beg for mercy, not just to the dinosaurs, but also to Grant, because he got on that plane there, and he obviously wasn't a member who was going to go into the jungle and scout the area for any predators or whatnot. However, though, Cooper doesn't get the chance to do either of which, because a certain dinosaur was out there, snatches him up. Nash tries to take off, but smashes the back of the dinosaur, causing the plane to be damaged, and ends up crash landing into the nearby trees. The fuselage was just basically hanging from one of the trees. The wings were stripped off, and basically it was badly damaged. It had no way of getting out of there now. And even if it could, the damage alone was one thing. It would have to have a new set of wings in order to get out of there. But because they were up in a tree far above the ground, they had no idea to do so. In any case though, the danger would still not be over, because the weight would shift around, the plane would eventually topple over and fall to the ground, where thankfully everybody survived. And, well, this was, of course, without to mention that Nash unfortunately gets eaten alive by Spinosaurus. Yep, this is the big guy who was basically put together. Once again, Stan Winston's intuition and creativity really shines through, much like what he did with the T-Rex. But Spino, I'd say, he does so much better in this instance. And while the design of Spinosaurus is still a bit on the controversial side, albeit because a number of things went on with Spinosaurus discoveries, like in 2014, for example, an entirely different Spino came around where it was found to be more quadrupedal with smaller legs as well as a different shaped sail. Also, the biggest thing about Spinosaurus mentioned in the 2014 discovery was that it was more of an aquatic creature. So this definitely was a whole different paradigm that had shifted upon seeing this new Spinosaurus discovery that was made in the year 2014, 13 years after this film came out. But before a lot of that happened, we had a Spinosaurus which was certainly designed based on what was known at the time about Spino, having a more bipedal form while occasionally being more quadrupedal, and of course having a sail that was more of this shape rather than this shape. So obviously nobody could make a Spinosaurus movie with a Spino from Jurassic Park 3, because otherwise that'd be very inaccurate. Then again, Steven Spielberg's not one to praise very well, because he has made inaccuracies of dinosaurs many times over. And it seems that even with this film, this was one instance where he actually was on a more accurate level, but it's basically the opposite. So try to wrap your head around all that stuff. Anyways though, Nash gets eaten up, the plane gets badly damaged, and while the others are able to thankfully get away from Spino, danger's still not exactly out of the way just yet. T-Rex appears in front of them. Even though Grant does tell them to stay still, they can't help but make a run for it. And while they end up in the path of Spino once again, this is where we get to see T-Rex encounter Spino, and the fight basically commences. It's basically a fight of the new century. Almost like if Godzilla and Kong were to come together in a whole different way. Spino and T-Rex proved to be formidable predators, with one, by today's standards, being more dominant in the water rather than land. It would definitely fall prey to T-Rex in a certain way. However, in this film, we have a Spino that actually is able to outclass T-Rex, because its swift movements and quick dodging allow for it to actually get behind T-Rex, snap its jaws on the T-Rex's neck, and with the assistance of its left hand, is able to break its neck, and Rex just falls to the ground. Wow. Talk about a victory won in Spino's favor. It really goes to show that this is a good example of the new king of dinosaurs. Because let's be real, Spinosaurus was actually made to be even longer than T-Rex and larger in size. However, with the more recent information about Spinosaurus, basically size variables wouldn't matter all that much, because the majority of them were found to actually be shorter than T-Rex. So that's a lot of info, really, to take in just for Spinosaurus discoveries, old and new. And like I've said, Cooper and Grant got into a fist fight, and now Grant is putting a fist fight on Kirby. Yep, Paul ends up getting a big punch, he falls in the bushes, and the search for Eric and Billy basically commences once again. After some time passes, Billy does get found, and Billy is able to take Grant over to a certain underground bunker. But really, we're all at wonder here. What the heck is going on with everybody else? Well, what we eventually are led to is a certain point where not only Billy is found, but Eric is also reunited with the others. They actually meet up over by a nearby fence. And, well, there eventually comes the point where they need to call the mainland, because without their plane, how are they going to get out of there? Well, they thankfully came prepared. A satellite phone was in their grasp. However, they couldn't quite figure out where it went. But the ringtone commences after they try to get a hold of it with their cell phones. Believe it or not, Spino ingested the phone. How do they know that? The beeps were heard from the ringtone of the phone, which is pretty classic. But it was found out that it was actually in Spino's stomach, because there he is right in front of them, especially within the fence. Thankfully, an opening is found where the whole group comes together and ends up running away. Spino was thought to not be able to escape from the fence, but lo and behold, it was strong enough to bust through the gates and chase after the group yet again. Thankfully, they were able to get into a nearby building, which, while it does keep Spino away, danger is once again right there in front of them. This time it comes in the form of what they presume to be certain exhibits, quote unquote. A raptor looked to be in perfect preservation, but it was actually alive and just waiting for its targets to come out. We once again have raptors in here that, while they're not at all as accurate in depiction, they certainly are unique predators, stealthy pack hunters that came along like the old wolves that we know of today, or other pack hunters really. But in any case though, this is actually the point where another thing about the raptors are known. They're not only able to hunt in packs, they're not only able to hunt in a stealthy fashion, they're not only able to detect and pick up senses, much like what the canine units have, but they can also emit unique vocal communications, mainly calls for help or whatnot. Because even though raptors are able to trap the others, they're actually able to turn the tides on them. And one raptor actually gets trapped when a door is locked in the outside position. The deadbolt is holding it in place, preventing the raptor from getting out. It ends up creating a cackling caw that signifies a call for help or distress. And well, that's one thing that does intrigue Dr. Grant. He is still convinced to go out with the others. They do, in fact, try to make their reuniting as precious as possible. Yeah, probably not the term to use in a good context like this when describing the plot of this film, because there's plenty of viscera, there's plenty of suspense, there's plenty of unique interaction with dinosaurs, including a nearby Ceratosaurus. Yeah. And all the while they go on a boat ride with the hopes that they can use the satellite phone, or at least find a way off the island themselves. The boat could have been a good solution to get out to sea, far away from the island itself. However, that would again not be the case, because even though it seemed like it was going to work well in their favor, Spino once again comes out, this time in the water, which itself is seen as an accurate depiction. A bit ahead of its time, but it still would work by today's standards, as some people from this generation would know Spinosaurus as of late and get to see Spino in this film. Seeing it in the water, they would think, oh my gosh, Spielberg, thank you very much for making Spino a depictable piece that is so accurate. I could love that Spino all day long. Yeah, again, I don't need to get involved in that kind of drama. But still, the real trouble with Spino here is that he is packing some serious heat. I mean, he causes the boat to get wrecked. He causes the others to fall into the water. They lock themselves in a cage to avoid getting chomped up. And while they're at it, the satellite phone comes out. And when it does, Grant goes ahead and grabs it and dials quickly to Ellie Sattler. However, Charlie picks up the phone, and while he's watching Barney, he gets a bit distracted. Eventually hands off the phone over to Ellie, whom is supposedly able to find out that supposedly Grant is in trouble. Sight B, the river, are the words that he utters before he and the phone are now underwater. He can't do anything at this point. Just rely on Ellie to help. Charlie is able to hint that maybe dinosaurs are on the loose and out to kill him. So, what do? Well, the crew of the island are again trapped in the cage and falls out. And while we are able to get to see the likes of the others almost drown, thankfully Paul is able to get out and is able to swim over to a nearby crane, while the rest in the cage are, well, still in the cage. They eventually do make their way out of there, though, when Paul gets Spino's attention and is thankfully able to stall him out long enough to where a fire ends up igniting. And when the fire does ignite, Spino is able to smash into the crane, and Paul eventually falls back into the water. Presumably, they thought that he was dead as a result of this, from falling from the crane and the fire itself. While Spino was able to, in fact, get out of there, the others didn't think Paul would make it. Surprise, surprise, though, he does come back in one piece. But once again, there's just a little too much of the suspense in all the parts where they get so close to dying. I mean, attacks by raptors, attacks by Spino, and a near-death experience from T-Rex, only for it to turn into an epic battle royale between two ferocious predators on the island. But this is where we get to have one last piece of the dinosaurs trying to kill the others. However, this is a different ordeal. The raptors, once again, make their way to the group. However, it's a different purpose. Rather than organizing the pack in order to kill the group, they actually hold them in a certain position, forcing them to kneel down before them. Supposedly, it has something to do with eggs that were stolen from their nesting grounds. And, well, basically, the alpha of the group does solemnly believe that Amanda Kirby stole the eggs. 2 eggs were in fact found in their bag, along with a whistle that they mainly would use for raptor calls. Or at least it's more of a call out for help in any case. And while the raptors do get their eggs back, the calls that were made and the noises that could be heard from the distance, supposed whirring noises, do in fact allow the raptors to get out with their eggs intact. And as for the group itself, well, they're able to get out of there as well, avoiding any more raptor contact along the way, and spinal contact as well. But we definitely can't forget one major piece that went down: the bird cage. Yeah, because as if all the Spino, Ceratosaurus, Raptor, and T-Rex stuff wasn't bad enough, you got Pteranodons in a bird cage. But of course, the very end of the film is where we do get to reunite with Billy, especially when he decided to save Eric after he was carried away by a Pteranodon and almost fed to a group of Pteranodon babies. But even though Billy was able to save Eric, he himself gets pecked and pecked and pecked some more by Pteranodons alongside the river. Like I said, for Jurassic Park 3, while it does thankfully end off with Dr. Alan Grant and his signature archaeology hat, kind of giving us a certain Indiana Jones 2.0 vibe, well, this is definitely an example of a third film in a series that, while it did something very different, while reintroducing older amenities that the first film had given us and was very successful for, I mean, the inclusion of Dr. Alan Grant and Dr. Ellie Sattler, as well as a partner of hers and a child of hers as well, Charlie, it exactly does make for a pretty epic third film in the series. But some people would pretty much digress. Some people might not really agree with the idea of all these different events taking place. Some people might think that it's a bit too on the scary part and too high on the suspense and whatnot. Some people might think that there's the idea of T-Rex being overthrown by Spino, and some others might even think that there's other things to be reckoned with that make the film not as big as the other two. But I really can't stress enough the fact that all this controversy about Spinosaurus nowadays, it could definitely come back to this third film in the series. And again, the year 2001, that was a point where Spinosaurus had not gone through all of these changes. When are people going to learn? Spino has had lots of discoveries, but after the film, not before. I mean, that head crest on its snout, that quadrupedal position, the aquatic lifestyle it had, all of that was found after the third film. So again, there should never be a point in time for people to start making drama on the internet because Spino is different in a Jurassic Park film. I mean, with today's films, you could expect a new Spinosaurus to come around and maybe it could have better representation of a more accurate appearance. But in any case though, Jurassic Park 3, I thoroughly enjoyed very much. Possibly more than the other two films. Because while the first film was epic and the second film was a different turn, while still utilizing a character draw that actually made Ian Malcolm even better than the first film did, the third film, while Sam Neill still does a great job as Dr. Alan Grant, and we still have Laura Dern doing a good job as Ellie Sattler, her inclusion's not as big as in the first film, and as for Grant's higher inclusion in this third film, he still does a good job being both the leader of the group and also coordinating many efforts to get off the island, including the fact that they were almost mauled to death by those raptors, but had it not been for the eggs, they likely would have been dead already, as he literally says. Above all that though, I'm willing to give this film a nice good scoring here. Probably not much more than what Jurassic Park 2 was like, or The Lost World Jurassic Park. Sorry. So, 8.8 out of 10.1. Not at all perfect for what it is, but it still is a good number 3. Far better than what most would have expected. Despite the critics and box office revenue, it still is a good number 3. Possibly on par with the likes of other number 3 films. Even Venom: The Last Dance had actually proven to be even better than the other two Venom films. I never bothered watching the second Venom film, and the first Venom film was pretty awesome. But it's the third film that ultimately tied the story together and even conclusified it. Something that most franchises wouldn't bother doing after number 3. So, this concludes my piece in the Jurassic Park trilogy. And I do hope that I can talk about the Jurassic World films. We'll definitely get to have lots to say about those films. In any case, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.
Whenever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.